At sunset, on a rice plantation near the Georgia coast, a white mistress woke up with iron around her wrists. She was tied to the same cedar post where she had spent years watching other people scream. The lantern was low, the marsh wind moved under the door, and standing in front of her was Naomi Reed, the enslaved woman she thought she had broken. Naomi did not raise her voice. She only lifted the key, held it where Adelaide Harrow could see it, and said, "Tonight, you will count what you call discipline." That night was supposed to be an escape. 42 enslaved people from 3 plantations had been preparing to vanish through the marshes, follow the Blackwater creeks north, and try to reach Union lines before the patrols found them. They had dried corn hidden under floorboards, pads memorized from old fishermen, and passwords carried in hymns. Naomi was supposed to be one of the first to leave. Instead, she stayed behind, not because she had lost her nerve, because before she ran toward freedom, she wanted the woman who ruled that plantation to feel one small measure of the fear she had sold as order. To understand why Naomi reached that post, you have to understand what the post was. It stood behind the rice barn, not far from the drying racks, a squared cedar beam sunk deep into the mud, and fitted with iron rings at shoulder height. The Harrow family called it the correction post, as if changing the word could change what happened there. The people forced to work Marrow Bend called it something else. The counting place, because that was where Adelaide Harrow counted lashes the way other women counted stitches. Naomi Reed had been brought to Marrow Bend when she was 16. She had been born farther inland, on a smaller farm where the soil was red and the cabins leaned in the rain. When debt swallowed that place, she was sold south toward the coast. By the time she reached the flooded rice fields of Marrow Bend, she had already learned the first law of bondage. White people could separate a child from a mother and call the paperwork clean. Marrow Bend looked beautiful from the road. Live oaks bent over the lane. Spanish moss moved like gray smoke. The big house was painted white, with tall windows and a balcony that caught the sea wind. Visitors saw silver pitchers, polished floors, imported china, and Adelaide Harrow receiving them in gloves. They did not see the mud. They did not see the mosquitoes rising from the rice canals at dusk. They did not see black men and women standing waist-deep in warm water, hands torn by reeds, feet blistered inside rot, bodies pushed past fever because the crop could not wait. Most of all, they did not see Adelaide without witnesses. Adelaide Harrow was not loud like the overseer. She did not curse often. She did not need to. Her cruelty arrived with a quiet voice, a folded handkerchief, and a face so calm it made pain feel like ceremony. Her husband, Gideon Harrow, cared about accounts. He calculated sacks of rice, barrels shipped downriver, debts owed, bodies bought, bodies sold. He could separate a family with the same flat expression he used to sign for lumber. Adelaide cared about obedience. She believed fear had to be tended like a garden. Cut here, trim there, make an example before the whole row grows wild. The correction post was her favorite tool. If a woman dropped a tray, Adelaide ordered 5. If a shirt was not pressed smooth enough, 7. If a girl cried too loudly after her brother was sold, 12 for insolence. Adelaide would stand under a parasol, close enough to hear every breath, and count in a voice fit for church. 1, 2, 3. Naomi learned early not to look at her, but Naomi had the kind of mind that kept looking even when her eyes were down. She noticed who carried keys. She noticed when the overseer, Felix Kane, drank too much cane liquor and forgot to bolt the tack room. She noticed which floorboards in the pantry lifted without sound. She noticed that Adelaide kept her private pistol in a lacquered box, but never loaded it herself. Most dangerous of all, Naomi learned to read. Never loaded it herself. Most dangerous of all, Naomi learned to read. An old man named Jonah taught her, with pages from an almanac,
and a broken slate hidden behind stacked firewood. He had once served in the house of a judge, and had stolen letters from the margins of law books. To him, letters were not marks, they were doors. Read the world, Jonah told her. Then read what they tried to hide from you. So Naomi read scraps of newspapers used to wrap parcels. She read names on shipping papers. She read pieces of news about the war, about Lincoln, about Union soldiers taking towns that had once seemed untouchable. To Gideon and Adelaide, the war was distant thunder. To the enslaved people at Marrow Bend, it was a crack opening in the wall. Rumors moved faster than wagons. Union patrols near the coast, Confederate shortages, men deserting, planters sending valuables inland, enslaved people disappearing at night and returning only as stories. By the spring of 1864, Jonah had begun meeting with trusted people from nearby plantations in the cypress woods after dark. They spoke in fragments: routes, food, hiding places, which creeks ran toward the river, which white families had lost sons and were too distracted to watch closely, which patrol roads to avoid. Naomi listened more than she spoke. Then Adelaide accused her of stealing a brooch. The brooch was gold, oval, set with the painted face of some dead Harrow woman. It went missing from Adelaide's dressing table on a Tuesday. Naomi had spent that entire morning in the washyard with 2 other women, boiling sheets under the eye of the cook. It did not matter. Adelaide wanted a thief, and Naomi had become too composed for her liking. Too still, too watchful, too hard to frighten. The next morning, Naomi was taken to the counting place. Felix tied her wrists to the iron rings. The cedar smelled of old rain and old blood. People were pulled from the fields to watch, because Adelaide believed punishment without an audience was wasted labor. Before the first strike, Naomi turned her head. She looked directly at Adelaide Harrow. Not long, just long enough to do the one thing Adelaide could not bear. She judged her. Then Naomi said, "The Lord heard every stroke before this one." For the first time since Naomi had known her, Adelaide lost her perfect face. It lasted only a breath. Then she said, 33. The overseer's whip fell until the world turned white. Naomi did not remember all of it. She remembered the first sound, the 21st breath, the taste of blood where she bit her own tongue, and the way Adelaide kept counting as if she were keeping time for a hymn. Naomi survived. But something in her changed its shape. For 3 days she lay on a pallet, while the women washed her back with boiled water and herbs, carried her through memories, her mother's hands, the auction yard, Jonah's whisper over stolen letters, Adelaide's voice counting in the sun. When Naomi woke fully, Jonah was beside her. "You crack something open," he said. Naomi could barely speak. In her, in all of us. The escape plan moved from rumor to decision after Gideon Harrow rode inland to protect family property from the war. He left Adelaide in charge of Marrow Bend with Felix Kane and a handful of armed white men who came and went. Adelaide seemed pleased by the responsibility. She tightened rations, extended field hours, ordered inspections of cabins. She wanted the plantation to run better under her than it had under her husband. What she did not see was how quiet everyone had become. Silence can mean obedience. It can also mean a door is being built where nobody is looking. The date was set for June 18th. A moonless night. Low tide after midnight. A church gathering at another plantation that would pull several white men away. The escape would include people from Marrow Bend, 2 neighboring rice estates, and a timber camp. If everyone arrived, there would be 42. Too many to hide easily. Too many to dismiss as a few runaways. Too many to move unless the choice had already become larger than fear. Naomi agreed to go, but she told Jonah she had one thing left to do. He understood before she explained it. And the understanding frightened him. Freedom first, he warned. It's you killed before you reach it. Naomi looked toward the big house, where Adelaide's windows glowed in the dusk. She has stood at that post for years and called other people's pain holy, Naomi said. I am not leaving her with the last word. Jonah did not bless the plan, but he helped make it possible. Naomi had found the key by accident 2 days earlier, tucked beneath ribbons in Adelaide's sewing box. Not a house key, not a cabinet key. Iron, wide tooth, heavy, a key made for restraints. Naomi pressed it into warm beeswax and returned it before Adelaide missed it. Jonah sent the impression through a chain of hands to a man at the timber camp who could work metal quietly. By the next evening, Naomi had a copy rough enough to scrape, but true enough to turn. The rest was timing. On the morning of June 18th, Adelaide took tea in her sitting room while writing letters to cousins in Charleston. The tea tasted of chicory and orange peel. It also carried a sleeping draught prepared by a healer named Dinah, strong enough to pull the body under, not strong enough to kill. Naomi watched Adelaide's pen slow. A blot of ink spread across the paper. Adelaide touched her forehead, annoyed, as if even her own body had committed a small act of disrespect. She lay back on the settee. Within minutes, she slept. Naomi did not move alone. Ruth and Bess, 2 women who had both been dragged to the counting place under Adelaide's orders, helped lift her. They wrapped her in a plain sheet as if carrying laundry, crossed the rear of the yard, and reached the rice barn before anyone questioned them. Inside, the air was hot and dusty. The cedar post waited in the dim light. Naomi chained Adelaide's wrists to the iron rings. Then she sent Ruth and Bess away. They need you tonight, she said. Get to the marsh path. Tell Jonah I will come. Ruth hesitated. And if you do not, Naomi tightened the last shackle. Then make sure they remember why. When Adelaide woke, she did not understand at first. Her hair had come loose. Her cheek was streaked with dirt. The fine blue dress she had put on for breakfast was stained from the barn floor. She pulled against the iron, heard the chain answer, and her face changed. Not to pain, to disbelief, because people like Adelaide could imagine death. They could imagine sickness, fire, war, even financial ruin, but they could not easily imagine reversal. Naomi, she said, voice dry with sleep and outrage, unlock this. Naomi sat on an overturned crate, the copied key in her palm. You are not speaking to a chair, Naomi said. Say please. Adelaide stared as if the word itself had been placed before her like a dead animal. You will hang for this. Maybe. They will hunt every one of you. They already do. You ignorant girl. You have no idea what kind of world is waiting outside this plantation. Naomi stood. That is the first true thing you have said. What kind of world is waiting outside this plantation? Naomi stood. That is the first true thing you have said. I do not know the world outside, but I know this one, and I know what you built here. From behind a barrel, Naomi lifted Felix Kane's whip. Adelaide went pale. Naomi did not rush. That was what frightened Adelaide most. There was no screaming mob, no drunken chaos, no fire on the roof, no wild revenge that Adelaide could later call savagery and use to protect herself from the truth. There was only Naomi, scarred and steady, standing in the place where Adelaide had made steadiness impossible for others. You counted for Hannah when she dropped the silver pot, Naomi said. You counted for Ben when he hid bread for his little sister. You counted for Ruth after her baby died and she could not rise fast enough. You counted for me when you knew I had stolen nothing. Adelaide's eyes moved from the whip to Naomi's face. You are not like this, she whispered. Naomi almost laughed. No, I am exactly like this. You just never had to see me whole. The first lash struck the back of Adelaide's dress and split the silence. Adelaide screamed. Naomi closed her eyes for half a breath, because the sound did not heal anything. It did not return mothers to children. It did not erase scars. It did not open the gates of Marrow Bend and make everyone free. Then she opened her eyes and counted. 1. For every child sold with no goodbye. 2. For every woman punished for grief. 3. For every prayer Adelaide had twisted into permission. Naomi stopped at 9. Not because Adelaide deserved no more. Because Naomi was not trying to become the thing she hated. Adelaide sagged against the iron, sobbing, her body shaking inside silk and cotton and entitlement. For the first time in her life, the correction post had corrected the wrong person. Naomi dropped the whip. "Look at me," she said. Adelaide did not. Naomi stepped closer. "Look at me." This time Adelaide raised her head. "You told us pain made us obedient," Naomi said. "But pain taught us memory. You told us fear made you powerful. But fear made you careless. You thought a locked door was safety because you never imagined the key could pass through black hands." Outside, a bell sounded from the yard. Once, then again. Naomi froze. It was not the dinner bell. Not the field bell. It was the short iron alarm near the smokehouse, used when someone saw fire, theft, or escape. Ruth and Bess should have already been gone. The plan had begun. Adelaide heard it too, and even through her tears, a thin smile returned. "You are late," she whispered. Naomi grabbed the key. For one dangerous second, she considered leaving Adelaide chained until morning. But chained too long, Adelaide might die. Dead, she would become a martyr in every white mouth from Savannah to Charleston. Alive. She would have to remember. Naomi unlocked one wrist, then threw the key into the shadowed corner of the barn. "You can free yourself if you crawl," Naomi said. "Now you know how long a few feet can be." Then she ran. The plantation had changed shape in the dusk. Cabin doors stood open. A bucket lay overturned near the well. Far off, near the marsh path, Naomi heard a child crying and someone hushing him. Dogs began barking from the overseer's yard. She reached the first line of cypress trees just as a gunshot cracked behind the big house. For a moment, she thought she had doomed them all. Then Jonah's hand came out of the dark and pulled her down. "Move," he said. There were 41 waiting. One man from the timber camp had not come. There was no time to ask why. They went into the marsh bent low, following a ditch that smelled of salt, mud, and rotting grass. Behind them, Marrow Bend woke into panic. Voices shouted. Another shot fired. A bell hammered the night hard enough to shake birds from the reeds. Naomi did not look back. Not until they reached the Blackwater Creek, where 2 flatboats had been hidden under cut branches. There, in the moonless dark, she turned once. The big house was only a pale shape beyond the trees. For 14 years, it had been the center of the world. Now it looked small. The escape did not become easier because Naomi had taken justice. If anything, it became harder. By dawn, the first group had crossed 10 miles of swamp and pine. Children had mud up to their knees. Old people trembled with exhaustion. Mosquitoes covered every exposed arm. The boats had to be dragged over shallows. Twice they lay flat in black water while riders passed on a road above them. By the second night, dogs found part of their trail. The group split into 5 smaller bands, each carrying a piece of the route in memory. Naomi stayed with Jonah, Ruth, Bess, Dinah the healer, a blacksmith named Abram, and 2 children whose mother had been forced into another band so the little ones would not lose both parents if one group was taken. That was the kind of arithmetic slavery forced on people. Even escape had to be planned like grief. For 6 days, Naomi's group moved mostly at night. They ate parched corn, berries, and roots Dinah trusted. They hid in cane brakes. They waded creeks to confuse the dogs. Once they spent an entire afternoon under a collapsed bridge while Confederate riders argued above them about whether runaways were worth chasing with Union forces so near. On the 7th day, Jonah's fever rose. He had been walking with a cough since the first swamp crossing, pretending it was nothing. By then, nothing had become blood on his sleeve. Naomi wanted to stop. Jonah refused. "You did not learn letters to turn back before the sentence ended," he said. Near dawn on the 9th day, they reached a burned farm, where the chimney still stood, but the house was gone. In the ash, Abram found a scrap of blue cloth caught on a nail. Union cloth. Not proof. Not safety. But enough to make everyone breathe differently. That afternoon, hiding in a thicket, they heard drums. Not plantation drums. Military drums. They followed the sound until a voice ordered them to halt. Drums. They followed the sound until a voice ordered them to halt. A line of Union soldiers stood beyond a split-rail fence, rifles raised, blue coats dusty, faces uncertain. Naomi stepped forward first, hands open. She was barefoot, her dress was torn. The scars on her back burned under the cloth, as if they knew the moment had arrived. A black soldier in Union uniform lowered his rifle. "You running from Marrow Bend?" he asked. Naomi tried to answer, but her throat closed. Jonah spoke for her. "She is Naomi Reed," he said, "and she brought us out." They were given water first. That was what Naomi remembered most. Not speeches, not flags. A tin cup, placed into her hands by someone who did not ask permission from anyone else before letting her drink. Then food. Then names written down. When the officer asked Naomi where she had come from, she said, "Marrow Bend, near the Savannah Marsh." When he asked what had happened there, she said, "A woman named Adelaide Harrow counted pain for years. Before I left, I made her count 9 of her own." The officer paused. He did not smile. He wrote it. Of the 41 who entered the marsh that night, 34 reached Union protection within 2 weeks. 3 were captured. 2 vanished and were never accounted for. 1 died of fever. 1 returned for a child left behind, and was later seen alive in a contraband camp near the coast. Contraband camp near the coast. Jonah lived long enough to see Naomi sign her name for the first time as a free woman. Not a mark. Not an X. Naomi Reed. After the war, she did not become a legend all at once. Freedom did not hand her a clean road. There was hunger. There were laws made to trap people in new versions of old bondage. There were white men who wanted the past rebuilt with different paperwork. There were nights when Naomi woke, hearing chains scrape against cedar. But she kept moving. She taught children letters in a church with holes in the roof. She helped families search for relatives sold years before. She spoke at meetings where freed people argued over wages, land, schools, safety, and the right to keep what they built with their own hands. Sometimes, people asked her about Adelaide Harrow. Naomi never told the story as simple revenge. She said revenge was too small a word for what happened at that post. "I wanted her to know," Naomi would say. "Not all of it. No person can feel another person's whole suffering. But enough. Just enough to make the lie crack." The lie was not only that Adelaide was cruel. The lie was that Adelaide had been powerful because she was right. Naomi's 9 lashes proved something different. Adelaide's power had depended on law, men, guns, money, custom, and terror. Remove those for 1 minute, place her before the person she had treated as property, and all her grand speeches about order and Christian duty collapsed into one frightened woman begging not to be hurt. Naomi carried out of Marrow Bend. Not that pain redeems pain. Not that violence makes the world just. But that a system built on stolen humanity can look eternal in the morning, and begin falling apart by nightfall. Once the people it tried to crush decide they are no longer waiting for permission to be human. Years later, the cedar post behind the rice barn was gone. Some said Gideon Harrow ordered it cut down because Adelaide could not bear to see it. Others said freed people took axes to it after the war and split the wood for cooking fires. Nobody agreed on the ending of the post, but they agreed on the story. On the night Naomi Reed ran toward freedom, she stopped first at the place built to break her. And instead of breaking, she turned it into testimony.